Greetings from Scarborough, where the Grand Hotel sits perched dramatically on St Nicholas Cliff, clinging on some might say, overlooking the South Bay. It once survived being shelled by the German Navy in 1914, though the guests apparently complained more about the draft than the artillery. Typical Yorkshire resilience. Aye, the windows rattled and shattered, but the tea was still hot. During World War II, they put anti-aircraft guns on the towers. Imagine booking a sea view room and discovering it comes with complimentary firepower. Then in the 1970s, the SAS quietly checked in, not for a holiday, though who wouldn't enjoy a Knickerbocker glory after a day of elite training? They would have bingo downstairs and upstairs commandos. Only the Grand could host both without blinking. It has 4 towers for the seasons, 12 floors for the months, 52 chimneys for the weeks, and 365 bedrooms for the days of the year. These days, the Grand stands proudly above the bay, slightly frayed at the edges like a once glamorous ant who insists he's never looked any better. So grab a cuppa, we're about to ride the roller coaster of the seaside giant's rise, fail and uncertain future. Back in the 1860s, Scarborough was the place to be. Sea air, mineral springs, parasols and a promenade full of people in their finest dress. A group of Yorkshire businessmen thought, let's build something massive, something Europe can't ignore, and they did. They built very big. They hired Cuthbert Broderick, a hull architect, and he designed a giant V for Queen Victoria, as nothing says luxury like a building built like a V and based on a calendar. When the Grand opened in 1867, it wasn't just impressive, it was jaw-dropping, the largest brick building in Europe. It had sea-water baths, sweeping sea views, elegant dining rooms, the sort of place you dressed up simply to order soup or walk through the lobby. From the late 1800s into the early 20th century, the Grand was at its glittering peak. It became the beating heart of Scarborough's high society. If you were posh, promenading and carrying a parasol, this was your stage. In 1887, the hotel opened its dining room to the cricket festival crowds, cementing a tradition that still echoes today. Ramsay MacDonald, Winston Churchill, Harold Wilson and Edward VIII all passed through the Grand's doors. Politics, pleasure and posh nosh, all under one roof. Even war couldn't stop the hotel. When German shells struck Scarborough in 1914, the Grand dusted itself off and just carried on. During World War II, it reinvented itself again, housing RAF training and mounting anti-aircraft guns on its towers. It is rumoured that Hitler intended to use the Grand Hotel as his British headquarters if Germany invaded. This is unproven but widely repeated in local history circles and adds to the building's mystique. The land beneath the Grand adds another layer to its reputation. Before the hotel existed, the site held a church and a hospital, and at times used as a leper colony and later as a plague house. Human burials were discovered where the car park now stands. Some believe these disturbed graves contribute to the unusually high number of ghost reports associated with the building. For more than a century, the Grand Hotel has been known not only for its architecture and history, but for the stories that refuse to fade. One of the earliest accounts centres on Anne Bronte. Before the Grand was built, a small cottage stood on the site, the place where Anne spent her final days.
Are they ready, babe?
Since the hotel opened, guests have repeatedly described seeing a quiet, pale woman in 19th century dress moving through the ground floor. She disappears the moment anybody approaches. Many believe the sightings are tied directly to the location of her last lodgings. Perhaps the most famous figure associated with the Grand is the Lady in Red. Witnesses describe a woman in a vivid scarlet gown gliding through corridors, with sudden cold spots, unexplained laughter or singing, and objects that move without explanation. Her identity remains unknown, but reports span generations. Local tradition also speaks of the Black Widow, said to be the spirit of a woman who took a life within the hotel. Her presence is linked to footsteps following guests down empty corridors, sudden chills and the distant sensation of being watched. She remains a prominent figure in Scarborough's ghost tours. The lift holds its own tragic chapter. In 1923, a teenage boy was killed when a counterweight fell and crushed him. Since then, staff and guests have described unusual activity, an extra person driving the lift who vanishes between floors. And there's a woman who enters, chats politely, and is seen by only one witness. To everybody else, the person appears to be speaking to empty space. These accounts are among the most frequently repeated in the hotel's folklore. Another long-standing report dates to 1871, where Reverend Hall took his own life in one of the rooms. In the decades that followed, visitors have spoken of seeing the reflection of an old-fashioned man in the mirrors, a figure who is never present when they turn around. The story persists because the Reverend's death is a documented part of the hotel's early history. Together, these stories, documented tragedies, local traditions and modern folklore makes it an interesting place. At the Grand Hotel, the past is never entirely silent. Despite the bad reviews you get about this hotel, before I moved here we used to stay there quite a lot for holidays. Never had any complaints about it at all. And nobody enjoys the Grand more than the seagulls do. Inside, the Grand was a marvel of Victorian ambition, fitted with every modern wonder they could devise in those early days. Servers' hoist whisked supplies through the building, an ascending room which carried guests to their floors. Electric bells chimed from bedrooms to reception, and speaking tubes linked every level to the manager's office. There was even a telegraph humming with messages from the outside world. The drawing room, looking out across the curve of the bay, glowed beneath 4 gas standards. But not everybody was delighted by the modern flair. Around 1890, the poet and travel writer Percy Cowley stayed at the Grand and found himself rather unsettled by its European polish. The waiters, he complained, were German, French or Danish, and the food was unmistakably French. He admitted he enjoyed the dinner, but bristled at the sauces and refinements, insisting that no ordinary Englishman could be expected to know what he was eating. Why, he asked, could they not simply serve good English food in the good old English fashion? The reason the ground level looks like this today is because a devastating fire in 1949 destroyed the original Grand restaurant and picture house structure. The Grand Restaurant opened in 1871. It was very popular in the late Victorian and Edwardian eras. You could even book a table by sending a postcard from the local post office on the same day. In 1914, part of the beachfront complex was converted into a cinema. It was known as the Grand Picture House, and it used to be around this area before it was demolished. At various times, this ground level space also housed an indoor roller skating rink, which was a massive craze then in the late 1800s. The original Grand Restaurant was a massive separate structure that sat on the beachfront level and is not behind this wall as many think. The damage was so great that the restaurant was gutted and was largely demolished. The wall you see today acts as a retaining wall and foundation for the massive hotel sitting on the cliff above it. Behind these walls are now storage and structural voids rather than public rooms. It is quite a haunting thought when you walk past it today. You are walking past the ghost of what was once the busiest restaurant in the north of England. The centrepiece is the main staircase. It was designed with wide sweeping curves to allow Victorian ladies in large hooped skirts to pass one another gracefully without their dresses touching. And did you know that the hotel has 11.5 miles of carpet throughout its public areas? Because Scarborough was a famous spa town, the bathrooms were large too. Most uniquely, the baths used to have two sets of taps, one for the fresh water and one for the heated seawater, which was pumped directly from the North Sea via pipeline. The most famous musical guests were the Beatles. They stayed at the Grand on December 11th, 1963, when they performed at the futuristic theatre nearby. Thousands of teenage fans, some having camped out for days, swarmed the South Bay. The Grand Hotel was under siege, with fans packing the forecourt and the streets surrounding the Grand, screaming for a glimpse of the Fab Four. They used a decoy car to distract the fans, where they were smuggled into the hotel through a service entrance. Now that's something I would have liked to have seen. After the war, a major refurb in 1947 brought the Grand back to life, but the world had changed. The golden age of British seaside holidays was fading. Sun-hungry Brits were swapping Scarborough for Spain. Gone were the ball gowns and banquets. In came family rooms and bargain breaks. Butlins poured in £2.5 million and even used part of the building for SAS training. For a while it worked. The Grand still had heart, even if the luxury had frayed at the edges. Then came 2004. Britannia Hotels took over, and what followed has become the stuff of local legend, and not the flattering kind. The Grand went on to win Wits magazine's Worst Hotel Chain Award 8 years in a row, a record nobody asked for. And yet, the Grand still stands. That iconic V-shape still dominates the South Bay skyline, like a stubborn relative who refuses to move out. Folks still stay there, drawn by the history, the sea views, or maybe just because they have a soft spot for the hotel. It's affordable, it's central, and if you squint a bit, you can almost see the old sparkle peeping through. But plenty leave with a sigh, their reviews reading like they had just had a quiet word with a disappointing relative. What do we do with these grand old places that don't quite fit the mould anymore? Do we let them fade away, or do we stand by them, the way Yorkshire folk tend to, stubbornly, loyally, and with a brew in hand?